Okay, so how many people almost melted last week? And that was brutal, wasn't it? My daughter decided to have a pool party on the 3rd, so that meant I got to do yard cleanup all last week. So, yeah, at like 6 in the morning. All right, well, thanks for being here. So, lots of familiar faces in the crowd, new faces in the crowd. If it's your first time, welcome. We really appreciate you being here. A little bit about the MML. We're in our 14th year of doing this. There are cards on the... Thank you. There's cards on the table. You can engage with us on LinkedIn. I think we've got a little over 10,500 people on LinkedIn now. We've been invited to the LinkedIn Inner Circle program, which gives us cool features like we were the first people to be able to use live streaming in LinkedIn and things like that. There's a website on that card also, mmlgroup.org. There's email address if you want to get engaged. And then, of course, there's Eventbrite, which you all signed up for. So lots of different ways to engage with us if you would like. So first and foremost, what I want to do is I want to thank our sponsors, because without them, it wouldn't be possible to do this event. So is there anybody from La Pata here, Mike or Laurie, if you could raise your hand? I didn't think they could make it today. Parkside, Brittany or Matt? All right, no worries. Atomic, Grant from Atomic? It's vacation season, right? We got Jason over here from Swift Systems running the technology. Larry was doing check-ins. Raise your hand, Larry from Weiss Advisors. Tom from Black Twig, right over here. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Jamie from CMA right up front here. Paul from Pulcinelli Law Firm was not able to be here. Was there anybody else from Pulcinelli here today? No worries. Matt from the Sage Group. Where are you, Matt? There he is. And Fortis. And John Gross from Driving Change. Where are you at, buddy? Here we go, right here. So if we could, a round of applause for all of them. They're responsible for the room, the food, the name tags, the seats you're sitting in, everything. So we really appreciate everything they do for us. And there is a sponsor table in the front where if you need any information on any of the services they provide, that's out there too. Please feel free to pick some up on the way out today. So our speaker today is Scott Nelson, an accomplished executive with extensive leadership experience in manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, and operations across both publicly traded and privately held companies. Throughout his career, Scott has helped organizations improve performance by building high-performing teams, developing strong cultures, and leading through growth and change. His experience includes private equity, mergers and acquisitions, Lean Six Sigma, operational excellence, and business transformation. Scott is passionate about people-first leadership and is a frequent speaker who shares practical insights on building cultures that drive both trust and results. He also serves on the board of directors and finance committee for Lighthouse for the Blind, St. Louis, and is an advisory board member for Logan University. Please help me in welcoming Scott Nelson.
All right, let's see, can you hear me okay? Yep, okay, great. Well, thank you, Tom, for that nice introduction. It's amazing when you turn AI loose, what it can do with your body of work. It sounds a lot more impressive than how I remember things, but I do appreciate that. And I really appreciate everyone for making me feel so welcome here this morning, too. It's a great group. I've just become knowledgeable about it, and I just really appreciate it, and I'm excited to talk with you. So, as Tom mentioned, I've had the pleasure of serving mainly in supply chain and operational roles across my entire career. Large companies, small companies, private equity, publicly traded. And the one thing that's been in common with all of that throughout the course of the career is I really developed first a curiosity, and that curiosity evolved into really a passion around the topic of leading culture. As I mentioned, I'm just becoming familiar with this group. So first time here, long time, I'd like to say long time listener, first time here, but not even a long time listener. But as the topic of leading culture, I knew that was something because I was passionate about it, I wanted to talk about it, but I didn't really know what ground this group had covered previously. So Tom and I went through some of the more recent presentations, and it looks like there's been a lot of discussion around just supply chain, manufacturing operations in general, technology, AI. lean methodology, process improvement, but really nothing around the topic of leading culture. So I was really excited when Tom agreed that this would be a good topic, and I'm hoping that maybe some of that curiosity that I had will rub off on you and perhaps stoke the same passion. But the problem was I really wasn't quite sure how to introduce it to the group. So who's that, you might be wondering? Well, that's my mother-in-law. Doesn't everyone talk about their mother-in-law, these things? Her name is Jan. We won't just refer to her as mother-in-law. But Jan turned 80 this past week. And that's a big deal. We had a big party for her, and I told her that she had made her way into this presentation. And so it's quite possible that she'll go back, and I'll send her the link, and she'll go back and watch it. So I'm glad that we had so many claps going on earlier, because you're all warmed up. I'm going to ask you to do me a big favor. If you would all just, on the count of 3, happy birthday, Jan. I know her birthday was last week, but 80 is a really big deal, and I want her to enjoy every single minute of it. So happy birthday, Jan, and just some nice play claps like you did before on the count of 3. All right? Can we do that? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday, Jan! Where were you all last week? I wish you had come to the party. That was great. So just a little bit about Jan. Jan was a career educator. She taught elementary school, and then she finished out probably the last third of her career as a principal at an elementary school. And I knew that having that amount of time in, and 80 years on this earth, she had touched a lot of lives. But what I was really struck by at her party was the number of people who had come out to celebrate her. As I thought about it, culture's a lot like that. Why did they come to celebrate her? Well, some of us had to. I'm her son-in-law. But the vast majority of people, it's because of how she touched their lives and how she made them feel through those interactions. And that's how culture is a lot like it. Culture is really about how people are made to feel as they interact with other people, and really about how it gets them to want to be a part of what it is you're building at the time. All right, we're gonna let Jan loose. Jan, if you're watching, you can now disconnect. You don't show up anywhere else in the presentation. But I'm gonna tell you the other big reason why last weekend was so important, and it's because I met 2 people at that party, and I got to hear their stories. And I thought their stories were really relevant to the topic today, and I wanna share them with you. So the first person is Sarah. Sarah, in the last couple of months, went through a really significant, I'll say life change, but it started with a career change. She picked up, she moved across the state. It was a new company, new job with a new company, and actually a new industry. So Sarah had been a 20-plus year veteran at her prior company, acknowledged as a high performer, always hit her numbers, and now she found herself really energized by this prospect of joining something new and building some new muscles, learning some new things. Maybe some people have been in that boat before. Pretty exciting, but it's kind of scary. Now, if you've never been in sales, before salespeople get released to be in front of the customer, they have to go through this onboarding process where they do a lot of education. They need to learn about certainly the company itself, the products that are in the bag that you're repping. How do you differentiate them? How do you differentiate the company? What are the selling tactics at work? What don't? Customer nuances, all those things. And like almost everything else today, it's done remotely. So it's remote learning. Sarah felt pretty alone through this process. It's intimidating because if you don't pass all of these tests, you don't pass go. You don't get to be in front of the customer, and that's what salespeople like to do. So when Sarah was onboarded, like what probably happens with most of us when we've been onboarded into a new company, she got all of the obligatory emails from her teammates. Hey, welcome to the team. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help, but hope you really don't call, sort of thing. And so Sarah didn't really feel that connection with anybody. And she had a lot of questions throughout this process as it was leading up to being able to do the tests and graduate, if you will. So she reached out to a few of the females. She thought, rather than just broad brush, I'm a female, I think maybe if I do that, some of the other females on the team, they might be a little bit more responsive than, no offense, some of the guys. And what she was met with was, as she described it, mean girl culture. I don't want to single any of the women out, but you know what this is? I watched the movie. I kind of have a sense for it. When I told my wife, she's like, oh yeah, absolutely. So mean girl culture. So immediately, the words of reach out if you need anything and the actions of Not really helpful. And it was almost like, if I help you, then that takes away from my importance, sort of thing, and a zero-sum game. So you might say, well, what about her manager? Where was her manager in all this? Well, she really liked her manager throughout the interviewing process. But after she onboarded, her manager disappeared. And he made it very apparent that he was going to be unavailable for a while. Now, he had a lot of openings on the team. And as I tell you this story, you're probably thinking like I was, well, I can kind of see why there's a lot of openings on this team. But he was really, his time was being taken up with doing this interviewing process. So she didn't feel like she could go to her manager at all. So back to last weekend, as I met Sarah, where she was about 3 months into this new job that she was really excited about, all energetic, has her losing confidence. She's losing confidence in herself. She's losing confidence in her decision. She feels isolated, and honestly is thinking she made a bad call. All right, second person I met, his name is Mark. Now, Mark's situation was different. He had been out of work for an extended period of time. Mark had a family, has a family. And there's a lot of pressure for Mark to get back to being employed and to be able to provide. So he went through a lot of interviews. It's tough out there. If anyone is going through a job hunt or knows people, it's a tough environment. So Mark had gotten to the point with two companies, we'll call them Company A and Company B. And he had gotten to the point where he was feeling like one of these could really work out. And as it turns out, Company A came forward and delivered. And they delivered him an offer that on paper, first of all, it was a lot closer to his home than anywhere that he had worked before, in Company B as well. And financially and all of the things kind of on paper were just better than anything he dreamed. But there was this little part of Mark that he felt, I don't really necessarily want to disengage with Company B. I'd like to keep dating. But there was a pressure, and he ultimately succumbed to the pressure and he accepted the job offer of Company A. But that little gnawing kept him involved. And the reason why that gnawing was there, as he described it, the owners of Company B, it was a family-owned company. And those owners took a real concerted effort and interest in getting to know who Mark was. They liked the professional body of work, but they wanted to know who was the individual. And it wasn't just the owners. As he met with other leaders, other people within the organization, it was consistent. Behaviors, the words, all of it was consistent from one person to the next. That's what kept him wanting to date while he had already accepted the marriage offer with Company A. So time went on, and Mark got to the point where he was ready to start work with Company A. And he needed to make a call. And much to his wife's chagrin, he decided to divorce Company A. He backed out on the offer, and he put all of his eggs in Company B's basket. Now, I'm happy to tell you that things worked out for Mark. So a couple months later, Mark has been employed with Company B. In his words, he's felt a lot of connection. He feels very accepted, and he found his fit. So maybe I just quick show of hands. Anybody been Sarah before? Okay. Yeah, a lot of people. Anybody been Mark? It's about 50-50. Which person do you think will perform better over the course of their career? Over the next couple of years, let's just say. Assuming Sarah stays there, which is highly, who do you think? Mark, good, okay. Absolutely it's Mark. I think we all agree on that one. And the point is that while performance is visible, culture and leadership are those invisible forces that influence it every day. They drive performance. They affect every single person in every single organization every single day. And they either accelerate an individual's performance or they impede it. Hang on just a minute. I get choked up whenever I tell these stories about mother-in-laws. And all right. Now, you just told me that several of you have been in their shoes. You might have thought whenever I started telling the stories, well, they're someone else's stories. But some of you have been Sarah, some of you have been Mark. I've actually been Sarah and Mark. And I'm really passionate about leading culture because I've been in both situations. And I know which one brings out the best in me and probably the best in anyone. Now, I had the opportunity to take a senior leadership role. New employer, kind of a new industry. Similar to Sarah, I was really energized by it. It was, from my family standpoint, financially speaking, challenge speaking, it was the offer of a lifetime. Companies that had been acquired, not integrated, best practice that hadn't been identified, codified, rolled out. being able to grow a team. I mean, really, really cool stuff. But as I accepted the role and as I started my onboarding, something was really off. There had been a lot of turnover in the leadership ranks. Well, that turnover actually accelerated. It's pretty disconcerting when you get into a new company and you start looking around and people are just falling off. All the people that you interviewed with and brought you to the company, if you've experienced it, you know what I mean. But the even more disconcerting part of it was the company and even the board of directors seemed kind of proud about that. They would boast, we have this culture where we eat our young. That wasn't told to me whenever I was going through the interview process. The front lines were no different. Ton of turnover. It made it really difficult with no continuity to get anything done. All the things I was being tasked with, no consistency, no continuity, no acceptance. And so ultimately, I took ownership of the situation and I decided to find another role. Now, at a different time, I found myself in a situation where great opportunity, leading a supply chain organization. The organization itself, the segment that I would be leading, had really been stagnating. Hadn't experienced sales growth, cut their way to making profits. People, the individual, the incumbent actually, the person I replaced had been in his role for 20 years. And there's nothing wrong with longevity, I just kind of criticized turnover. But the fact was it got stale. And I knew going into it, we needed better performance, we needed better alignment, and quite honestly, we needed a culture that would support what we needed to do. But I had this little bully that showed up inside my head. Anybody ever have that little voice that kind of sits there and it tells you, hey, this is too big for you. I don't think you're going to be able to do it. You're going to fail. Anybody ever have that bully that shows up and they only have negative things to say. They don't say anything positive. Well, I knew if I was going to get that bully to back off, I was going to need some help. So I didn't know it at the time, but these two gentlemen were about to give me the advice that was going to change my way of thinking forever. So the gentleman on the left, I guess my right, is Rob. Rob was my counterpart. He had the same role, different segment of the company, but he was acknowledged as one of the best leaders in the company. He introduced me to the other gentleman, Tim. Tim was the founder of a company called Focus 3. Focus 3 specialized in cultural transformations, and Rob had recently brought Tim in to do a very similar exercise that, well, they were trying to pitch me to go through. So the advice that they gave me, though, was just way too simple. They said, Scott, there's only two things that you need to focus on. And that's culture and it's leadership. And I remember thinking, there's got to be a lot more to it than that. What about strategy? Surely strategy mattered. What about talent, people? Those things matter. What about KPIs? We need KPIs. What about all the things that I knew needed to happen? But what I learned from these two as mentors is that culture and leadership, whenever you get it right, they determine how effectively all those other things come together. And I kind of knew that. I knew culture mattered. I'd experienced good cultures, I'd experienced not so good cultures, but what I really didn't know was how to start. Like, how do you build that? So the lessons I'm going to share with you here this morning are exactly how we went about that. And the very first thing that I learned was that culture matters a lot more than you think. So every organization has a culture. Now, that culture has either been very carefully architected and built, or it's just simply evolved over time. Either way, you have one. And a lot of companies will talk about culture through a document, and that document hangs on the wall, and you can walk in and you can see, this is our culture, this is what we believe. And I'm not going to tell you that that's a bad approach. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you how to do that. But culture isn't what's up on the wall, it's what happens in the hall. It's what we believe, it's how we behave, and ultimately it's the outcomes that we achieve through the experience we deliver to others. As I just mentioned, that might align with what's up on the wall, but it might not. And because culture determines behavior, it has to be exceptionally clear. That's one of the benefits of documenting it. It gives you that opportunity to make it clear, and it needs to separate what's acceptable from that which isn't. Because when it's exceptionally clear, culture actually becomes exclusive. That's a tough word. Culture becomes exclusive. We're supposed to be inclusive organizations. We're supposed to be an inclusive society. And that's good. We want to be inclusive. But what I mean by that is if you have absolute clarity around the values and the behaviors that are acceptable and that which isn't, it makes it very obvious whenever behavior is occurring that isn't congruent with that. And it's not to say that you can't act that way, you just can't do it here. That's not acceptable here. I keep using the phrase leading culture because it is the leaders who role model and determine what culture really is. And ultimately, I think we all know this as leaders. People take their cue from what we do. We role model it. Their behavior is a direct reflection of the culture that we as leaders have created. But don't take it just from me. So real quick, we're going to listen to an audio clip, and I'll give a little bit of background. If you haven't seen the movie Remember the Titans, it's one of my favorites. And what you're going to hear is an exchange. And this exchange is between Gary. Gary is the captain of the football team, and Julius. Julius is another member of the football team, one of the standout stars. And what's happened is Gary has approached and confronted Julius because of some of how he's been carrying himself. And you're going to hear how Julius and Gary, well, how the exchange unfolds. By the way, that little bully showed up on my head this in my head this morning, and he said, "That audio is going to bomb." And he laughed and he went away, not knowing how the acoustics are going to be. So hopefully you heard that okay. But I'll tell you, if you couldn't, for anyone that's maybe watching online, the main exchange was, see, that's the worst attitude I've ever heard. And Julius says, attitude reflects leadership, captain. Attitude reflects leadership. That's a really heavy cross for leaders to bear, isn't it? But I think it really speaks to the shadow of the leader is very far-reaching. And it also illustrates that as a leader, that unconscious influence that we have on people, it's what we do, it's what we say, it's what we prioritize, and it's ultimately the incentive that we put in place for people. All of that is what has the most impact on the second team's behavior. And that's the second thing that I learned from Rob and Tim. And that's that leadership really matters a lot more than you think. Now, as leaders, we know we can't accomplish everything on our own. And certainly as your size and scope of your job and responsibility grows, it's harder and harder to do that without relying on people around you. You need to build good teams. The best leaders make it their job to find out what it is that's important to each and every person and provide that every day. They create an environment where they can be successful. They're really good at capturing the hearts and minds. They focus your effort, all of your energy, and they help enable accomplishment. And that accomplishment, if you have the right leader, is to do things that you otherwise wouldn't do on your own. If you would have done it on your own, it would have been easy. You needed someone to motivate you and help you believe that you were capable of doing more. Now, I'm going to do a little participation exercise. The bully, again, he had some words about this, but we'll give it a shot. Because while I told Tom and Jason that I was going to ask them the question, I didn't get the answer. So I have no idea how this is going to go. But I'm going to ask you guys, and everyone in the room, if you can think about the very best leader you've ever worked for. What was it about that leader that made them the best? Tom, we'll start with you. Role model.
Yeah, there was a gentleman by the name of Steve, and for the life of me, I've been trying to think of, since you asked the question for his last name, I can't think of it. He has since passed away from cancer, but I had another career in the parcel service 30 years ago, and I was a night supervisor during college, during part of that career, and he was this, what was called center manager, so it was a 70 UPS truck facility in Fayetteville, Illinois. And what I remember about him is he gave me enough rope to hang myself in a good way. So he would let me go and do whatever I needed to do, and I would do it, and then when I would hang myself, he would come and he would say, hey, have you looked at this alternative way of doing it? But he was just, he was a kind soul, and was always smiling, and just kind of gave me the autonomy that I needed, but was there as a mentor when I needed that as well.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. All right, no pressure. Jason.
For me, it was a little different because I've worked for Tom for 25 years now.
Oh boy. This is why you rehearse before.
So I started as a software developer, made my way up to a project manager, and now one of our lead architects. I talk with all of our customers that we have. I serve them and I make sure everything is a success. I've learned everything about every industry that we work in because of Tom, how to treat people, how to respond to people, just to act as a person. So I can't think of a better compliment to give them.
Yeah. Yeah, Jason's next review is going to go really well. Well, I'm glad that actually played out how I thought it probably would. You didn't hear them talk about technical skills. What you heard them talk about is how they were made to feel, how they were inspired, how they became the person that they are today. And obviously, Tom's done something right. 25 years is awesome. And as Tom mentioned, great leaders, they see the potential in people before people see it themselves. They have an uncanny way to be able to do that. They're able to build trust, they build commitment, and ultimately they create relationships. And that's what you heard was the relationship they had with that leader, not how great a technician they were. Now I found that the secret to doing that is exceedingly simple. All you do is you find out what's important to that person and you make it important to you. And you do it in a way that is genuine and that they can truly feel it. I think we've heard actually people who, from Tom and from Jason, people who have experienced that. Have any of you experienced that? Work for someone that can truly do that? I have. Leadership isn't just a difference maker, it is the difference maker. And leaders will create the culture that people experience. So great leader, great culture, great results. It really is that simple. I mean, if you think about it, let's take the opposite. Can you think of any companies that are known, perennially known for achieving great results, but they're also known that they have shitty leadership? That doesn't happen. Now, what you might know, what you might be thinking about, and I can think of this, great results throughout, leadership changeover, not for the good, and what happens? They're no longer put up on the pedestal for their results. Company goes down. But extraordinary leadership requires something a lot more harder than just inspiring people. It requires balancing tension between what really are opposing forces. And that's the third thing that Rob and Tim taught me. The balance matters much more than you think. Have you ever worked with someone that they're great at getting results, at least initially, but there is a trail of destruction a mile long behind them? Maybe it's casualties of war, people that got fired. Maybe it's they ruined this segment of the company. Or maybe it's the opposite. You work for someone that you really loved, great person, but the team they led, their body of work wasn't really known for putting points up on the board. There's a tension that gets created between these two somewhat opposing forces: build trust, achieve results. And the best leaders, they know how to master the balance between those two tensions. Tim was great for quotes. And one of the quotes that Tim left with me was, "Trust without results is unacceptable. Results without trust is unsustainable." Trust without results, unacceptable. Results without trust, unsustainable. What that really means is if you over-index on building trust, and if you aren't able to deliver the results that the organization needs you to deliver, that won't last. You won't last. But the flip is true too. If you are that individual, that one that I said left the trail of destruction a mile long, you may get some short-term results out of your people, but without that foundation of trust, that won't be sustainable. People will leave. You won't get the full impact of their performance. So this first balance, it's all about foundation. But foundation requires direction. So the second balance is really about how do you create and paint that vision of the future. And here, I'm going to quote Tim again. Tim had another great quote that said, "If it isn't happening in you, it won't happen through you. If it isn't happening in you, it won't happen through you." And I think that's really it speaks to the importance of leaders need to inspire self first before they can radiate that positivity and that belief that really causes other people to want to pick up and follow them. But there's a trap in all of that. The trap is oftentimes it's just the positive part of the story that gets told. And that can come off as being really detached from reality. All right, so another question. Have you ever sat through a town hall, and as you're sitting listening to the leader speak, and maybe they're talking about the current state of the business or a current initiative, they're trying to get support for what it is they've championed, and as they're talking about it, how great everything is today, how much greater it's going to be tomorrow, you sit there and you kind of think, maybe you say to the person sitting next to you, you know what, from where I sit, this is kind of a train wreck. Does this person even work for the same company? Are we all doing the same thing? Has anybody done that? Or is it just me? I've had countless of those things happen. But that's what happens whenever leaders lean too far towards the inspiration and they stray away from realism. Positivity is really important. We like positive people. We want to follow positive people. But people don't follow leaders just because they're positive. They follow them because they're believable. Once people believe where you're going, then the question really turns to, well, how fast can we go? So that's the third balance. All about tempo. Now, manufacturing leaders in the room, I'm sure you know the cost of moving too slowly. What happens? Productivity, no good. We get behind on our orders. Now revenue's starting to suffer. What happens then? You either get the call from the customer or the salesperson first. I bet it's the salesperson. They're upset. It's not a good situation if you spend too much time and fall behind. But on the other side, you probably experience the cost of making a poor decision or rushing into a decision. Maybe you find that the problem you thought you were solving wasn't actually the right problem. Or maybe it was that the solution you came up with was just a lousy solution. Now, I used to work with somebody, he would proclaim, I want to be the GSD leader, get stuff done. That's great. The problem was he had such a heavy lean towards getting stuff done that his actions came off as really poorly contemplated, and not only his team, but the organization just simply lost faith in him. Everyone has a lean. Balance is what we aspire for, but everyone has a lean. If I'm being honest, my lean in all of this is a little more towards deliberation. I don't like to be wrong. I don't like to be pointed out whenever I'm wrong. Maybe that's a better way to say it. I don't think anybody does, but what I've found is that often in my reluctance to want to make a decision, to get the next data point, to be able to find enlightenment that this is absolutely positively the right way to go, you lose precious time, and I'm letting good get in the way of I'm getting great, my aspiration for perfection getting in the way of being good. There was that bully again. You messed up that quote, Scott. But you know what I'm talking about. That's the problem when you have these opposing forces. You've got trust, you've got achieving results. We've got inspiration, we've got realism. We've got deliberation, we've got action. Leadership isn't about picking one or the other. It's really about finding the balance in that. Leaders will challenge hard and then they commit fully. So here's my challenge to you. Next couple of days, I shared with you where my lean was. I want you to look in the mirror, do a self-assessment, pick the area, the tension that you lean towards the most, and next week, try to lead away from it. All right, sounds good so far, but question I'm sure you're probably asking is, okay, Scott, we haven't talked much about strategy. We haven't talked about talent, people. Aren't those the things that actually win, that they help us to win? Culture sounds great, leadership, yeah, okay, but what about strategy and what about people? Strategy is important. I'm sure you've heard the quote, I think Peter Drucker gets attributed to Peter Drucker, but culture eats strategy for breakfast, it eats it for lunch, it eats it for dinner. I think culture has the appetite of an 18-year-old boy. It's whatever, I mean, I've heard so many different, I don't know what it actually was. But the point is, you can't strategize your way out of a bad culture. Culture will always supersede strategy. Now let's talk about people. When it comes to people, our traditional processes help us to assess and hire for skill. We need skilled people. Problem is, when we force a separation, it's oftentimes for behavior. Hire for skill, fire for behavior. If we spent more time on the front end assessing for fit, cultural fit, we get to avoid that fire for behavior. So let's go back to Sarah. I started out with the conversation about Sarah. Sarah was a great hire. That didn't change. Behavior she exhibited in her prior company, that made her successful. She was acknowledged perennial high performer, 20 plus years. But she's really struggling in her new organization. Why? Her behavior hasn't changed. The culture is what has changed. Winning behavior will not thrive in a culture that won't support it. That's what she's experienced. And that's where it all comes together. So whenever you take leadership and culture and you really get it right, strategy and people, and you put it all together, it becomes a multiplier. It doesn't replace it. And that combination becomes what your competitive advantage really is. You don't necessarily get the results you want, you get the results you lead. Okay, so how do you lead it? Well, culture can tend to feel like this sort of invisible thing that's there. Not sure I can really change it, I can't impact it, and that's just simply not true. Culture can be built to spec. It can be designed and it can be custom built to what it is you want. So what I'm going to do over the remainder of our time is I'm going to make this a little bit more practical. I'm going to walk you through the playbook that we use to really turn our values into behaviors and ultimately our behaviors into results. We turned how we work into how we win. And then I'm going to show you 3 different examples, 3 different organizations. They all built that playbook. And I'm going to leave you with a little bit of a tool and some homework to pressure test your leadership. Now, I mentioned earlier that culture is really, the way that we define it is how we behave, and that needs to be exceptionally clear. There can't be any doubt. When there's total alignment from top to bottom of the organization, everyone knows what's acceptable and what isn't. There's no question. So one of the most important tools that we use to accomplish that is the culture playbook. And what that playbook did is it prescriptively laid out what we call the VBO, the values, what we believe, the behaviors, how we act, and the outcomes, what are we going to achieve. Together, they link culture with strategy and how we win by outbehaving the competition. Now, these need to have very careful thought and consideration. You don't rush into your VBO without really thinking it through. And I'm going to give you some questions to ask as you go through that process, because it is the playbook by which you operate. It's also not a matter of going out and seeking permission, groupthink, let's have everybody weigh in, let's vote on it. They're developed top-down by leadership, and then they're cascaded throughout the entire organization. The culture playbook links what we believe with how we're going to win through the behaviors of our people as they execute the strategy of the organization. That's the playbook at a high level. So how do you write one? Well, you start with your values. VBO, values, behaviors, outcomes. The values can either be your existing core values for your organization, or it may be appropriate, and I'm going to give you 2 different examples. It might be appropriate that you take something that's a little bit tailored towards your particular team or your function, but they need to align back to the organizational core values. Either way, they need to reflect what matters the most. They need to acknowledge that values lie in the heart, not the head, and ultimately they're going to guide the decisions, they're going to guide our priorities, and they're going to guide every interaction that occurs. So from there, it's time to create the behavioral statements. Behavioral statements should be crafted in a positive context. Use words like always versus never, everyone versus no one, do versus don't. And you need to write them in a way where they're understandable at every single level and role within the organization. They need to be specific in nature, and they need to be things that can be taught and role modeled for the organization. As leaders, we need to teach it, and then we need to live it. And lastly, they need to be relevant to the individual. And what that means is they should be natural in that individual's normal course of daily work. And a good litmus test is if you had 2 different people that observed someone delivering one of those behaviors, would they agree that it occurred? This is the most difficult, but it's probably the most important part of the playbook, So I'm going to give you 3 questions that are really important to help guide that work. And once you've answered the questions, you get something like this. This is the VBO that our leadership team created when we were working with Tim. That's how I got that bully in my head who was telling me that I wasn't going to be successful in this role, to back off and go bother someone else. So we began with these 3 questions. First one is, what cultural or behavioral traits help us to win? We felt like if all of our actions were really geared towards the customer, and if we could bring simplicity and predictability to our work processes, ultimately our work product would be what differentiated us and helped us to start winning and growing the business. So the second was, what cultural traits do we want to reinforce? Now, our segment, I told you, was going through a lot of change. And with that was uncertainty. People were uncomfortable. We knew it'd be a whole lot easier to get people to get behind it if we were real and we acknowledged that it was going to be uncomfortable and the amount of work and effort it was going to take to try to change the course. So what behavioral traits do we want to change? There was a lot of tension between various parts of the organization. Field versus corporate, first shift, second shift, inbound, outbound. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Yeah, absolutely. We had to change a mindset in order to change the behavior. And that was really more thinking like a team and a value stream versus our individual functions. But once we did that, we had a lot of debate, but what we weren't really good about was debating and then aligning on a direction and executing. So that was what we were trying to change. Let me give you another example. This was developed by our leadership team in a different organization. And in this case, we had a new set of corporate values that had just been rolled out, and it was being communicated to the entire organization. So we capitalized on that timing. We were also in the process of shifting from a decentralized organization to really standing up centers of excellence and centralization. And the supply chain needed to change some behaviors in order to be able to support that new model change. So what this allowed us to do was not only talk to our current staff around how we needed to change the way we behaved, but as we were recruiting new people and we were building a team, we could talk to them about that and really assess whether they would fit into that type of a century-led organization or not. Now notice these values and these behaviors don't look anything like the last one I just showed you. That's the beauty of all of this, is the VBO can be really custom tailored and fit to your organization, not copied from a template. It's the same 3 questions, just 2 different organizations. And to show you it's not just a corporate tool, I'm going to show you a VBO from outside of corporate America. Now, I didn't share this earlier, but throughout all of my time in my career, especially early on whenever my kids were younger, one of my passions was coaching. I coached youth volleyball, high school girls mainly. I know there's a special place in heaven for me because of that. And now well, she's a college-age girl, but trust me, that it actually taught me more about things than you might even know. But we started by asking those 3 questions. First question was, what helps us to win? Now, we weren't blessed with the same level of athleticism and talent as some of the other teams in the area, but we wanted to win. We had that desire. And we had to find a different way to be able to do it. So the very first value, be the hardest working team. The behavior, give maximum effort, every practice, every day. The outcome was simple. We will wear you down, and you will be frustrated with us. And when it comes down to it, the most relentless team at the end, we're probably the ones standing. And we won more matches that way, not because of our skill and athleticism. So then what do we want to reinforce? What traits do we want to reinforce? Well, volleyball is a team sport. 6 girls on the court, a few may come off the bench. There's a lot of girls that don't even get to participate. We wanted to reinforce team orientation because not everyone can be the best server or the best hitter or the best defender. So find your best. Focus on what sets you apart and be the best at it. That just reinforced that every single player can contribute, and they contribute something specific that they can be the best at, and nobody's a spectator, especially when you're not on the court. And the last is, what do we need to change? So we need to be confident that we had seen it all when we got into a match. That was a mindset change. Our practice intensity would translate to match confidence. So that last one, practice how you want to play. Approach every drill like it's win or lose. We would be prepared and had seen every situation in our practice, and then we had confidence in the match that we knew how to win that point. It's the same method. 3 different organizations, different context, 3 different VBOs. But building it's only part of the deal. The other part of it is how you communicate it to the organization. So what you see here, as we introduce the VBO to our respective organizations, we utilize this kind of communication piece. And it illustrated to people what is culture, why is it important, and most importantly, what's expected of you? How do we expect you to actively engage? It's important to note, I mentioned earlier, we didn't ask for groupthink, we didn't ask for permission, we didn't ask for buy-in. This was a call to action. Leadership established very clear expectations, and then we cascaded it and role modeled it. And we knew that the force was strong. I'm sure it's strong in many of your organizations too. It may sound extreme, but we felt our commitment needed to outlast any resistance. Because the playbook's only as good as our commitment to it as leaders. So introducing the VBOs sort of set the expectation with everyone, but I think we all know expectations can often fade fast. So then the question is, how do you make it stick? Anybody lived through this battery of the flavor of the month initiatives? Maybe you're living through one now. What's the very first question that people ask whenever the next one comes along?
How long will it last?
How long will this one last? Yeah, and in that tone of voice too. How long is this one going to last? And then they take bets on it. Every organization I've been a part of, the most difficult thing is how do you get the change to stick? Think back to Sarah and Mark. Neither of them experienced a value statement. They experienced the day-to-day behaviors of the people within their organization. And that's why you can't stop at just defining culture. It has to be taught, and then it has to be reinforced. But it can't all fall on the leader's shoulders. The very first step is defining it. That is a leadership responsibility. But after that, it's an all play. We need everyone to own teaching it. Now, at every team meeting, we rotated responsibility. People took a leadership topic, they took a part of the cultural playbook, and they taught it back to the rest of the team. And this wasn't just leaders or team leads, it was frontline coworkers that were expected to do this. It cascaded through the entire organization. And then we reinforced it. You have to reinforce it because once it's taught, you need to make sure it's caught. Our employee recognition system was the way to be able to do that. When people saw a behavior being demonstrated by one of their peers or by one of their people in their team, it went through the employee recognition team and they got points. And some of the most impactful recognitions came from peers, not that person's leader. The hardest part of leading culture is not writing the playbook. It's not teaching the playbook. It's not even reinforcing the playbook. That's what we covered so far. Hardest part is really looking in the mirror. Because when it comes down to it, it's not going to sustain itself. It's sustained by us, the organization's leadership. So that brings up a really important question as we start moving to close. How do we make sure we're leading ourselves effectively? You need to lead self before you can lead others. So here are the questions that I think leaders need to ask themselves regularly. Any of these make you uncomfortable? Let's go through them. Annual leadership development plan. I never had a leadership development plan. But the reality is, elite performers, they build skill through repetition. And it's the same with extraordinary leaders. Extraordinary leaders are not happy with their current performance today. They want to be good today, better tomorrow. There was a longtime CEO of Allied Signal and Honeywell named Larry Bossy. And I had an opportunity to listen to Larry speak one time. And he said, as leaders, you're either growing or you're swelling. And that really stuck with me because I think this really speaks to the importance of leaders growing through personal and professional development, not swelling through ego. You'll notice the second question doesn't say how frequently am I communicating, it says how effectively am I communicating. And the reason is effectiveness is really about quality and clarity. And quality and clarity are not determined by the communicator, they are determined by the recipient. How many of you have been frustrated because you've communicated over and over and over again? Why is it they're not hearing what I'm telling them? I'll tell them again. It's not the reason, it's not the frequency, it's the quality and the clarity of your communication. Or maybe you've heard, people have taken things the wrong way. That's not the way I intended. Well, intentions really don't matter. They're irrelevant. What matters is perception and experience. So the point of question 2 is really to assess the quality and the clarity of your communication, thereby impacting your effectiveness, and really closing that gap between intent and perception. I thought number 3 might make some people uncomfortable. That's a tough one. How do I show up whenever things get tough? Really easy whenever everything's going great. Want to be out front? It's all awesome. Where it really gets difficult is whenever things aren't going well, and that's whenever leaders can have the desire to disappear. You can't outweigh a problem and hope it goes past. Managerial silence is an absolute performance killer, and it destroys your culture. I love number 4. What am I not seeing? Culture is what happens and what leads when no one's watching. You can't see it all. That's why it's so important that the culture playbook permeates throughout the entire organization. You know what's happening when you're not watching. And the last one, it's a lot worse if you see it and you turn away than if you don't see it at all. Because what you permit becomes what you promote. So these 5 questions are intended to hold yourself accountable as a leader. You can ask them, that's just a starting point. Really comes down to what do you do with it now that you have the answers? All right, we're almost out of time. That bully was wrong. I wasn't going to run over. This actually timed out very well. So I'm going to summarize. We covered several key points, but I'm going to crystallize it into 6 key points, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. So the first, we talked about the fact that leadership and culture are your competitive advantage. Strategies can be copied. They're copied all the time. How you work, how you lead, that can't be copied. Think back to Sarah. Think back to Mark. Think back to my story. In every case, it wasn't strategy. It wasn't the environment. It was leadership, and it was culture. That's what determined the outcome of those stories. We talked about it's what you believe, it's how you behave, and ultimately, it's the outcomes you achieve and the experiences for others. It's not the poster on the wall. It's the belief to behavior to result connection that culture brings. And we live it out each and every day. Leaders create the culture through the behavior they lead. That is a leader responsibility. You are obligated as a leader. You cannot delegate that responsibility. What you do is always going to be much louder than what it is you say. Extraordinary leadership lies in the tension. We talked about the tension between build trust, drive results. I need to inspire. I need to be real. I need to remember what it was that I was going to say for the very last one. Those deliberation, see, I'm thinking about it, and that bias for action. Those tensions, leaders don't choose one or the other. It's not a one or. They effectively combine and balance both of them. And the VBO framework is what makes that culture concrete, and it makes it teachable, and it makes it repeatable throughout the organization. And lastly, we said if you can manufacture sustainability into your leadership cadence and how we assess, that can be through your leader standard work. It can be through your teachbacks. It can be through your recognition system. It should be through your recognition system. That's how we keep culture from being just another flavor of the month. So Sarah, Mark, and I, we all had 3 different stories. We had 3 different organizations. We had 3 different outcomes. The common denominator wasn't strategy. It wasn't work environment. It was all leadership and culture. And the good news is leadership and culture are 2 things that each and every one of us can take back when we leave in the next 10 minutes and go back to our workplace. You will get the results that you want because that's how you led. I really appreciate your time and attention. This was great this morning. We've got, I think, a few minutes for questions. I'd love to hear from you.
Question? All I got I've got two of my people in this room also, so we're a small company. How do you address one person in the company that's been there the longest that won't adapt? Besides firing. So they already know what firing is.
It's not one of them. Okay. Whoa, is it 9 o'clock already? I think we need to. Let me guess, they're a pro in place too.
Pardon?
Sorry, terminology. Let me guess, they're a pro in place. They're really skilled at the job that they perform.
To a degree, yes.
To a degree, okay, well that brings in a different element then. Well, let's just focus on the behavioral part of it. I mean, this is hard stuff. When you're dealing with people are complex, and complex people require complex solutions, but actually it's really not all that complex. I said it before, your commitment needs to outlast their resistance. And in the end, there's a decision to make. Culture's exclusive. If you are not willing and able to demonstrate what the behaviors are as called for by our culture, you're not a bad person, you just don't fit here. You have to make that decision because what you permit is what you promote. If the three of you see it, I guarantee the rest of the people in your company see it. And now everything that you're talking about is being met with, well, they really don't mean that. They're not going to address that problem. So, I mean, the leadership resolve is to have that candid conversation with that individual, specifically lay out, and then you reinforce the hell out of whenever they do. And when they don't, you publicly praise, you correct in private. But, I mean, certainly I've experienced that too, and those are difficult things, but again, you're either committed to it or you're not. Yeah.
I tend to be results-oriented and focused, and I struggle to take time to really think about culture and making sure that I'm building what we want to have. Do you have any suggestions, or what successes have you had in terms of structures you put in place for you or your time that help you to keep re-engaging proactively with what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a great comment. I don't know what role you hold within your company. I'm not going to put you on the spot to tell me, but it's a lot easier if the passion and the importance of this is residing at the right level of the organization. So let's assume that we've got that support, or maybe you're it. So it goes back, I mentioned the term leader standard work a few times, and I don't know if that's a common terminology with people, but as somebody who's gone through the lean principles and really thinking like a lean leader, my standard work, which wasn't, I get up at 6:30 and then I get my coffee and then I have my shower and then it's not that prescriptive, but it does break and chunk my day and my week and my month into what are the kind of the important things I need to make sure and do. And then I have, as important as my standard work is, I also have my outcomes metrics where I have my own accountability of, did I do these things or not? So for example, I like to exercise because I like the way it makes me feel, and I keep track. Did I exercise today? Yes or no? And if I did, well, I probably had a pretty good day. And if I didn't, well, I know why I feel that way. Culture is the same thing. So you pick out those things that you want to make sure, and it could be as simple as, I want to make sure that I catch someone, I taught it, I want to make sure they're caught. And every day, I need to make it a point to go out and find that. Like that type of accountability is really powerful. And you can share it with your team too. That's where I think showing that vulnerability and telling people, here are some things I really want to work on. Here's my leadership development plan. And I need accountability partners. And it doesn't have to be your peers or your supervisor. It can be the people that work for you as well. And I'm trying to get to be a better leader. Help me reinforce whenever I'm demonstrating these things. And it's all about habit building then. But that's where I found leader standard work to be really impactful, at least for me and for others.
All right, everyone, just a couple of things. Thank you, Scott. That was a fantastic presentation, probably one of the best culture presentations. I want to put a special thank you out to this man right here in the baseball hat, Cyril Narishkin.
Not a baseball hat.
I'm sorry, is it a soccer hat?
It's a real football hat.
Oh, it's a football, I'm sorry, a football hat. So Cyril helped us find Dave Stewart last time, helped us find Scott, and is also helping us for our private event to find David Walters from High C in September. Cyril was literally in Paris, I don't know what time that would have been, but flew through North Carolina, had a plane breakdown, and is here this morning. So I just wanted to say a special thanks to Cyril for literally traveling halfway around the world to be here this morning. Literally. Let's see, Jace, can we get a picture of the crowd, please? So our standard joke here is if you're running from the law, duck your head, because this is going on social media. All right, great, thank you. I also want to put a little plug for Jamie at CMA, one of our sponsors. They are all about leadership development, so if there's some things that rang true with Scott today that you need help with leadership development, Jamie's your person here. Marcianne, where are you at? Marcianne is looking for a VP of Ops. She said the role is closer to a transformational VP operations COO position focused on operational consistency, leadership development, process discipline, accountability, and scaling a multi-state operation. So if you know anybody that fits that description, please see Marcianne. We're trying to help her find somebody for that position. Carol, can you stand up for me, please? Carl, sorry. I keep screwing up your name. I believe you're still looking for a role, aren't you? Yeah. Can you tell the crowd what you're looking for?
Past 2 roles have been running manufacturing companies with full, responsibility and existing background in operations. So looking to continue in a capacity, higher tech manufacturing, design build manufacturing company. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. Joel, where are you at, buddy? Joel Emery. Yeah, over here. Can you tell what you're looking for, please?
Structural and sustainable growth, so I'm looking for an opportunity to join the team in leadership capacity at the intersection of marketing and sales operations, as well as other components like recruiting, finance, things like that.
Great. At MML, we're all about relationship building and education, so thank you for everyone for that. Okay, so our next event is one of these private events, so if you are in manufacturing, industrial, construction, or distribution, you'll be on our list. If you're not on my list, let me know. We can get you added to that list. But it's a small core member event, not the entire MML ecosystem, but it's on 9/11, and we're going to have David Walters from High C. They make vents for chimneys, things along those lines, so the metal caps that you would see on chimneys. He's going to be speaking with us. So 9/11 here, we'll be doing that event. There's a newer feedback form on your desk. There's a section at the bottom that says, I need help in my company, not what you're selling, not what you're consulting, not what you're offering, but if you need help in your own company with any of those, I think it's 8 or 9 topics at the bottom, fill that out. We go through those as a sponsor group and we look for members of the MML ecosystem that can help you with that very task. So if there's something you need help with, please let us know. Yes, sir.
Make sure you put your name or phone number on there.
Thank you.
We frequently get those without any information, so if you filled it out in the past and didn't get a call from one of us, we tried.
Yes. Yeah, name or phone number so we can get a hold of you. Thank you, Larry. That's great. Okay, and then please recycle and throw your trash away. There are bins everywhere, and there's a little brown basket at the back for your name badges. Thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend. It's supposed to be beautiful.